Hi sewing friends, long time no see. I wanted to just shoot a very quickie tutorial for you for something that I think would be great for holiday gift giving season and for market season. So I think we're all pretty much familiar with little wristlet straps like this, but I just had a slightly different way of doing it that combines a couple of different things that you probably have laying around. So that is going to be our quickie tutorial for today, just making one of these quick little wristlet straps. All right, so what we've got going on here, this is just a 1-inch wide wristlet strap. You can obviously make these in larger, like 1.5 inch size if you wanted to. You can make them smaller as well. The reason that I am choosing to shoot this whole little tutorial for you today is because this is all kind of made out of little scraps that I typically have laying around that I want to use. So one of the things here is we've got vinyl here. This is just a sample one that I made, but I often have really long, thin little scraps that I want to save. Of course, we want to save everything, right? But sometimes it's just not enough to make a full project out of. But these are wonderful impulse purchase items at your fairs or craft booths. And you can also throw them in with full bags that you make if you have one that matches. The only hardware you're going to need for this is a 1-inch lobster claw. And I often have those around versus some of the other wristlet strap styles that have really small hardware. I don't often have that around, and I don't have it in as many colors, but 1-inch I always have around. So uses a 1-inch lobster claw. That's the only hardware. Optionally, if you would like, you can add a rivet to this, but you don't need that. So again, minimal hardware. We're using our scrap vinyl, and the other scrap that we're using of really valuable material today is webbing. So you can see on the inside of my wristlet here, I actually have webbing. I often end up with these, 14, 15, 20-inch long scraps. I don't have two, so I can't make handles, but I have these pieces, and again, I don't want to get rid of them. So what I really love about this style of wristlet strap is the webbing kind of acts a little bit like piping. It's really strong because it's our typical strong, nice webbing that goes in our wristlet strap. It's the part that's touching us, so it's nice and soft on our skin. And having the handmade webbing or any other kind of detailed webbing like this just adds a little something to an otherwise kind of boring wristlet strap, right? So I'm going to show you exactly how I do this continuous loop wristlet strap today. And if you want to use a rivet, I'm not going to, but after you're finished and you get to this step, you could add it right up here on top. Now again, that's not something that I do. It just adds extra expense and cost, and it's not necessary, but you could. So let's get started. All right, so to get us started, I have a scrap of pretty vinyl here. I have a scrap of my handmade webbing here, but you can use any kind of webbing that you'd like. And then I also have my 1-inch lobster claw. You are going to additionally need tools-wise, just a pair of good sharp scissors. You will need a lighter to burn the ends of your webbing, make sure that's sealed. And then you're going to need some double-sided tape. I have some really thin, this is my favorite double-sided tape, 1/8 of an inch wide, that I just use on everything. So good sticky double-sided tape is going to be your friend on this one. This is not an overly finicky tutorial, but basically what we're doing is offsetting the webbing and the vinyl when we put them together in this continuous loop before we sew the lobster claw around, and we're sewing this whole thing continuously in a loop, okay? And in order for us to do that, I like the webbing on the inside, vinyl on the outside, but you can do it the opposite way. However, when you do that, when we get to our assembly of these pieces, you're gonna need to cut them accordingly, okay? So my strip of handmade webbing, I'm gonna make an actual wristlet that my hand can fit through. I've got about 14 inches. You don't have to be exact on the money on that. You could go as far down as 12, a little bit bigger than 14, but I don't like to go much bigger than that. That's a nice size. And additionally, if you have really little scraps, you could even make these in really small little loops for key rings. Those little loop ones are very cute too. They're just not wristlets, and they're more for like hanging keys. But anyway, I'm doing 14 inches, so my scrap of vinyl that I have is about 14 inches as well. We are going to end up cutting a little bit of that to make this fit, and I'll show you that in a minute. But width-wise, what we're gonna want, this is how I aim for mine to look. I really like for my strip of vinyl to be a little bit skinnier than 1 inch. If I'm using 1 inch webbing, I cut this to just about a little bit smaller than 7/8 of an inch. And I'm not really precise about it. But the reason I cut my vinyl skinnier is because I like for the webbing to kind of act almost like piping on the side, right? I love the way that that looks, and it kind of finishes off the edge nice. And also that means none of the vinyl is really ever, that sharp edge of the vinyl is never touching my skin. It's always that soft webbing that's kind of gliding in and out on my hand. So not only do I like the way that it looks, but it just keeps the vinyl nice and crisp for the longevity of this. And the webbing that we're using is really good strength and quality. So I prefer that both for look and for comfort. So I like to cut my vinyl down just with a rotary, just skinnier than 1 inch. So if you want a wider berth on there, you could cut this 3/4 of an inch and you'd have a lot of webbing sticking out on the side that would look like piping. I just prefer this. So that's just, I'm taking off about between 1/8 and 1/16 of an inch off the 1 inch width. Okay. Essentially what we're doing is we're going to make a continuous loop with these two. We're going to sew them wrong sides together. And when we make that continuous loop, we just need to make sure that we offset them a little bit, as I've done right here. It's a little bit hard to see, but that's kind of the point. My webbing stops and starts right here, but my vinyl stops and starts here, so that they are offset. So the two of them are offset, and the seam ends up kind of like up in here under the lobster claw. And the two seams of where the vinyl meets, this is where the vinyl meets right there, and then where the webbing meets is up here, right? So they're offset. And that's just for strength and then to make it look continuous. So 2 reasons. So that's what we're ultimately trying to do here. So how I like to do this is my handmade webbing is going to be on the inside of my wristlet, and I've got my pretty vinyl with its wrong side on the wrong side of my handmade webbing. So we're working wrong sides together, and I'm going to start by lining them up loosely, and then I'm going to make just a loop like this. So what's going to happen here is I may need to cut a little bit of the webbing off. I may need to cut a little of the vinyl off to make this fit and be a continuous loop. Right now, with how these are, I've got gaps. See those gaps? We don't want that. We want these to look like they are fully continuous. So what I'm going to do is cut a little bit. Let's see. Again, this is like a guess and check situation. And we really want to offset these by about at least 1/2 inch, maybe more, because we want some good strength, right? And we don't want all of these, get back in frame here. We don't want all of these to be like all on top of each other, if that makes sense. So we really want, if I shift these down like that, now my seam for my webbing is back here between my thumb and forefinger, but my vinyl is all the way up here. So I've got like 1 inch of overlap there, and that's a pretty good amount. We're going to kind of guess and check this first a couple of times and cut it accordingly so that it makes a continuous loop. And then we're going to double stick tape everything, and we're going to sew this entire thing in one go all the way around with the lobster claw in it. Again, this is the most kind of fiddly part of this, just guessing and checking, making it fit. You can use some clips if that helps you before we tape, just to get everything lined up kind of nicely. So my seam of my webbing is right there underneath that clip. And right there underneath that clip, right? And so now I've got a gap there, and I don't want to have that gap. So 2 things I'm going to do. One, I've got a not straight line right here on the end of my vinyl. I can see that. So I'm going to take my scissors, my nice sharp scissors, and I'm just going to trim the tiniest bit off. So I now have like a good parallel between those two. That one is not off anymore, right? So we still have my gap. Now what I'm going to do to make that gap smaller, I'm going to need to cut my interior material, my black handmade webbing. So I'm going to actually go back here to this piece, and it looks like I needed to take off. I'm just, again, guessing and checking. I'm going to cut that off just like that. So I cut off a little tiny bit, and I'm going to burn this so my ends are nice and sealed. You'll want to do that on any webbing as long as it's not cotton. I don't really recommend cotton for this project, to be honest. So now that I cut some off, I'm going to come back here with my materials, wrong sides together again, and I'm going to kind of check my fit. It's a bit easier, by the way. I mean, I start off with two pieces that are really similar, but sometimes if the outside vinyl is just longer, it's the easier one to cut. And then you don't have to kind of keep taking this apart. So if I offset this by, you know, about an inch, clip it again, wrap this around. It's just a lot easier to cut and trim this before I do double-sided tape. So I am really, really close now. You can see by trimming off that little bit of the handmade webbing, my gap is no longer there. I'm actually overlapping a tiny bit, and that's okay for now because I can literally come back here and I can kind of just trim a little bit. And you want to just keep, I trimmed off such a tiny little amount. That's how much I trimmed. I want them to kiss each other perfectly, and I don't want there to be any gaps all around my wristlet, right? I want it to be like flush. If this is too long, it's gonna bulge. Like I'll have a gap here, and I don't want that. I want snugness all the way around, and it's literally just about fitting it and making it super snug. Okay, so I took these two apart, and I'm gonna apply my double stick tape. I'm gonna put it on my vinyl on the wrong side because this is skinnier. If I apply it to the outside edges of my webbing, it might end up showing because remember we cut our vinyl skinnier. So I'm just gonna start on one end here, really close to the edge. For this project, you really are gonna need a good double stick tape that you can sew through because you really want it super close to the edge, just to prevent shifting. Okay, so I've got double stick tape on both of the long edges of the wrong side of my vinyl accent strip, and then I've got my wrong side of my webbing facing up. So I'm going to go ahead and remove both of the tissues here, and we are going to apply our accent, the vinyl accent strip, wrong side on both of these. Okay, so wrong sides to wrong sides. Now again, remember we're offsetting and our vinyl is now longer than the other. So it doesn't really matter where you kind of pick, you can eyeball this, but I like to offset by about an inch. So I'm gonna just kind of pick what looks like maybe a little over an inch, and I wanna center this on the wrong side, and I'm gonna press. I think I got maybe like 3/4 of an inch right there, so I might, let's pull that down just a little more. I want more than an inch, not less, if I'm gonna go one way or the other. So again, we're gonna make sure this is nice and centered as best as possible. Just go all the way down. Okay. I'm just kind of pressing it in. Now you want to eyeball this and make sure that your vinyl accent strip is nice and centered. If it's not, readjust it because we're about to sew it, and this is such a quick little project. Once you get that guess and check portion down, you're done. So now we need our lobster claw. I still have the exposed sticky right here, and I'm going to thread my lobster claw on. This is important. I want the vinyl on the outside. I want that showing when this is on my wrist. So my lobster claw needs to be face up. The lobster claw portion needs to be face up on this so that when it's wrapped, right, the vinyl's on the outside and my claw is also out there. So just make sure you're not doing that backward. So here's where we have the offset of the webbing and the offset here, right? And I've got double stick tape, and now I'm going to just kiss my vinyl to my webbing. Now that I've kind of pressed this on here, you can see I've got another big gap. See how it doesn't meet up? I don't want that. So I'm going to peel this off and I'm going to cut a little bit more off of here. This can happen sometimes if your vinyl stretches when you're applying it to the webbing, or like if you just had a little bit of a gap. If you had a bit of a gap and you didn't realize it, you can end up with that gap. So I want to make sure my webbing is lined up perfectly and kissing, and so is my vinyl. I have a teensy bit have a gap right there. Do you see that gap? I don't really want that, so I might kind of again keep like guessing and checking until I can get it perfect. I will say I often kind of squish my vinyl together like this and then kind of bend outward and bend inward like this to make it fit. I'd rather have a tighter fit than a looser one as far as it goes with these, because they do kind of move. But what you don't want is when we bend this, see how there's too much of a gap there? So I just think my webbing is a little bit long. So I might just cut off. I mean, we're talking about like a hair's width. This is just a guess and check kind of thing when I'm not doing it on camera. See how little I cut off? It like splintered into pieces. I'm gonna burn it again. This is a good sewing project to make when you are like watching TV, super out of it. You just want to make something for your markets, for the church festival, to give to friends in a gift basket, new homeowners on a housewarming key. Okay, so I've got a pretty seamless look there, and I've got no gapping. And again, if I think I have gapping and I need to cut something, I'll do that. But I think I'm pretty happy with that. So let's get all this little schmutz out of the way. My lobster claw threaded on, that's super important because now we're just gonna sew this in a loop, okay? For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm using a hot pink thread that you'll see in a minute here, just so it's easy to see how close I'm sewing to the edge. But I use all kinds of stuff. This one is kind of a Christmas theme, so I used a Christmas variegated thread on here that's got white, green, and red in it. You can use obviously whatever you want, get crazy, do like, you know, something flashy, but for speed and just again making like real basic, you know, impulse purchase items for your fairs, I highly suggest just using the same color thread. Contrast stitching obviously takes a lot more time and effort, you know. So let's get down here to the needle and you can watch me sew this. All right, so here we've got our little continuous wristlet loop held together with double stick tape and nothing else at the moment. And then I've got my lobster claw threaded on here. Super important, because we can't do that after the fact since we're sewing this in a continuous loop. So I want to give you a look here at my vinyl seam right there. It's pretty darn continuous, and I don't, you know, have a big gap there, which is what I want. I want these like smushed together as much as possible. Same thing on my webbing here. Now that's going to be a little bit more hidden, so I'm less concerned about that, but I want them sandwiched and as continuous as possible with no gaps. I want to make sure my prettiest stitching is out here on the part that I want to show, which is going to be my vinyl for me. So I'm actually going to turn this inside out now. And you will notice I will have a little bit, when this is turned, gap here on my webbing. That's fine. We just want to make sure as we're sewing, we pinch this together to keep that gap closed. Same on the inside here with the vinyl. When we are turning this inside out, you might see just the tiniest little bit of puckering around here because it's now squashed on the inside and it's longer. That's okay. That actually results in a better overall result for us. So I'm not actually upset about that, but you do need to pay attention while you're sewing. If you have a little bit of a lump or anything, just make sure it's nice and flat on the bed as you're going. You're going to continuously move this lobster claw out of the way as you sew. So just keep that in mind. Got to keep it away from the needle so we don't break a needle. And then again, we're just going to sew really, really close around the edge on the left and the right. I do both here. I sometimes sew an extra line of stitching on the left and right short edges here where they're meeting. However, you don't always have to. On this one, I didn't. I chose not to. Really just, that's a personal preference. And again, if you're going to put a rivet right here after the fact for decoration, or you feel like you want to do it for strength, probably don't need those extra stitches, but up to you. So doesn't really matter which side. I'm going to start out here on the left side with my lobster claw out of the way. I do like to stop and start where my vinyl, where the webbing, not the vinyl, where the webbing meets, just because this way I can keep everything, again, kind of squished and kissed together. So I'm just going to move my lobster claw out of the way where I can control it. I'm going to keep it in my hand here. And then I'm just gonna go ahead. I'm about a 1/2 inch back from the start of my webbing. I'm going to back stitch right here as I go, and we're just going to go all the way around. All right, now we are at the stage where we are going to secure our lobster claw. So right here where I have my lobster claw currently is actually where the webbing meets. And I think I'm just going to use that point to sandwich this and connect it, because I offset my vinyl by about a little over an inch or so here. So that seems like a perfect connection point to do a line of stitches, and I might do one line and a second line. This is also a point where, like I said earlier, you could put a rivet if you wanted to. If you had just two random rivets you needed to use, you could just rivet and rivet here. However you want to finish these off, these little wristlet straps are a great way to use up, like if you have a fashion rivet or something like a, you know, like a shape, like a character or something like that, you could go ahead and use that up here, because, you know, sometimes we end up with random onesie twosies of things and it's not really enough for us to make a full project, but we can use that kind of stuff up on cute little impulse purchase items like this, and it does help them sell better when they're a little bit more special. So I'm just going to go ahead and sandwich my lobster claw right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and sew from this line of stitching to this line of stitching, and we'll be all finished with this. So I've put my needle down back here on this edge where the stitching starts, and I'm just going to sew across to this portion of stitching, and I'm just going to keep going back and forth here until I'm kind of satisfied. I will probably just backstitch go all the way across and then backstitch one other time. That should be enough. And I'm going to backstitch at my start and stop point on this as well. And I'm sewing through all the layers to make sure my lobster claw stays sandwiched up here in this little loop. And then lastly, I'll take my lighter, just burn off all the little bits that are sticking up. Same on the other side if I have any. All right, there you have it, all finished off. Webbing on the inside, nice little scrap of vinyl on the outside, very minimal hardware wristlet. Now again, for the purposes of this tutorial, I don't pull the threads through the back and tie them off. You could do that to clean this up a little bit. Typically what I do is just don't use contrast stitching because you will see your stop and start points a little bit more on here. If I had used black or a dark gray, you wouldn't notice it at all. Much like on this one where it blends in really well, you really don't see my start and stop points hardly at all. So for the purposes of the tutorial, I did the contrast stitching, but I would not have chosen that if I were sewing this one to sell. I would have just used the black. So do keep that in mind for some of the different colors or styles, or if there was more going on with this vinyl, you wouldn't see that as much. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this little quickie tutorial. Again, these are just really great things. Go through your scrap bins, and you know, especially like this handmade webbing and some of our other specialty webbings, it's expensive. So if we can make something out of our, you know, waste products, hey man, you can, once you've got this down, you can make so many of these sitting in an hour. It's a no-brainer project, and you just earned yourself some money. And these are also not, you know, hard to just keep in a bin for every one of your markets. Quick go-to gift idea. They're awesome. So again, anytime I can make something out of my scraps, I'm gonna do it, and love these no-brainer projects that don't make me have to think too much. So anyway, thanks for having me in your sewing space today, and I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. More to come at some point, but until then, happy sewing, and thanks for joining me today. Bye-bye.